Hello everybody and welcome along to this afternoon's webinar with myself, Calvin, and I'll be your host and presenter. And today we'll be covering error corrections. I do of course have Duncan alongside me who will be in the background answering any questions you may have, so please feel free to ask those as we go through with today's presentation. Let's get into the fun stuff, which is the contents of today's session. So we're going to start off with just giving you a brief introduction to error corrections, including some reasons why and some examples as well. Then we'll look at the various different methods. Firstly, we'll be looking at restoring a backup, and then secondly, we'll be having a look at the rollback option. And following on from that, we'll look at then FPS adjustment. So what do you need to do in order to adjust your submission to HMRC once you have made that correction, followed by adjusting your employee's pay. So what can you do to help you adjust that employee's pay? And then we'll finish off with going through some further support that you have available to yourself, as well as the remaining time for some questions. Now, the session should last approximately half an hour, but again, we'll make sure that we have a little bit of time at the end to answer any remaining questions you guys do have. Okay, with that said, let's get into it. So firstly, the introduction to error corrections. So firstly, what can go wrong? So here's just a couple of examples about what can go wrong in regards to your payroll and a reason in order to make that correction. So the first one is either an over or underpayment. So if you've over or underpaid an employee or several employees, you'll need to make this correction. Statutory payment errors, incorrect dates, or an employee's come back earlier than expected. There can be a lot of reasons for this, but this is another one. If you've accidentally entered the wrong pay date or the wrong national insurance category, as well as pension errors. Of course, we are all human and mistakes can happen, which is why we have the functionality to be able to correct them. So what options do you have in regards to error corrections? The first one, nice and easy, is just to correct the error in your next pay run. So if you've overpaid or underpaid, you can, of course, just increase or reduce your employee's pay next time you come to pay them. The alternative option to that is if you can't do it in the next period, you will need to reprocess your payroll. So this is where you would need to restore a backup or roll back and then run that payroll again and then submit your FPS adjustment. Once you've done that, you would need to then adjust your employee's pay directly in their bank and HMRC payments as well. So those are the two options that you have available to you. So we're going to have a look at the right-hand side one, so reprocessing your payroll, and we're going to start off with restoring a backup. So restoring a backup. This is where you would restore a backup you have taken manually or when the program has prompted you to. So these will be files that you'll have saved on your PC or hopefully in a removable hard drive, so a little USB stick. It is recommended you do that as well so that you've got them separate to your actual computer in case anything goes awry with that PC itself. You can also recover automatic backups by using the recover option, sorry. Not a restore option, that's for a manual backup, but the program does take an automatic backup in the background and you can recover these should you have lost any of your backups. And when would you use this option? So firstly, if you've got any recent mistakes, so if you've just finished October's pay run, for example, since we're at the end of October now, then you would restore a backup to redo this. And if it affects all or most of your employees, so if you need to reprocess most of your employees or all of them, you would need to restore a backup. So again, with this, it is one of those that will mean that you'll need to reprocess everybody. And there is a little thing just to take note when it comes to restoring that backup, which I've highlighted here. So we'll run a demo of this in a moment, but when we get to it, you'll have the restore wizard available and you'll see here you have a variety of different files that you can restore. Now, by default, only data files is highlighted. And what data files is basically your, as you can see there, it's basic data, payments, company info, etc. So if you are just reprocessing payments, you would only need to have data files highlighted. Now, I've also highlighted RTI files in this slide just to make you aware of this. So what this will do is it will restore FPS data. And this is only to be used in specific circumstances because you cannot reverse an FPS if it's been sent. So if you were to restore this and you've already sent your FPS, then it can lead to you sending a duplicate, which would in essence double the figures on HMRC's side. And it can be quite complicated to redo. So this would only be an option if the program is indicating that you have sent an FPS, but you can categorically say that HMRC have not received anything. That's the only option you would use that. So I've highlighted that because we do get questions about it. Should you or shouldn't you? It's only if HMRC have definitely not received that FPS and the program is showing that you have. Okay, so for default, it is just data files. So let's get into it, and I'll run a demonstration of restoring a backup in our program now. And I'll highlight the two files and I'll show you what I mean about those as well. So here we have our payroll. Now we've processed up to October, and you can see that from the last updated dates and the last FPS dates. Now take a note of those columns because they are going to be key to knowing whether you've restored correctly or not. So we've updated our records and we've sent our full payment submission. Therefore, the dates match, which as it should be. So let's go ahead and restore our backup. So to do this, click on File, then go to Restore. Click Next. So you'll see here, we're in our Restore wizard, and here's where we've got all our available files. Now I'm going to just leave data files highlighted because I'll show you why in a moment. Click Next. Browse to the location of your backups. So here we have our backups, and then Next, and then Finish. It will prompt you for your username and password. There it is. So we are in with Manager. Pop our password in, a very complex one. And then we'll click OK. You can see straight away whilst this is loading, the last updated date has now changed to September. And that was when the backup was taken. We'll close out of that. So yeah, you can see there that the last updated date has in fact changed. But what you'll notice is the last FPS date has not. What that means is we can now go ahead and reprocess October's pay. So go back into Enter Payments, make the corrections that you need to do, and then re-update records. Then it will be a case of an FPS adjustment, which we'll get into in a moment. Okay, so what I'm going to do is employee 3. We'll use this person as an example. We'll go in Enter Payments. And we'll say that we have missed off some overtime for this person. They did 8 hours of overtime. There you go. Save and next. Close out. And then what we'll do, highlight everyone again, and we'll update the records. So I've just used one person as an example for this. When you use the restore option, restoring a backup, it would likely be because you need to do that for all of your employees or most of them. But for speed of time, I'm just using one person today. So we'll finish that. Click OK. And there we are. We are back up to date in regards to the payroll. So you can see there the last updated date and last FPS date matches. And what I do want to show you as well is what happens if you do choose those RTI files. So I'm going to go back to File and then Restore. I'll do that quite quickly. This time I'm going to leave data files off and just select RTI files. Click Next. Let's go ahead and get that backup in and then hit Finish. Pop the password in. Click OK. Now keep an eye on the dates again. There you go. You will notice now that the last FPS date has, in fact, I'll just close this out of the way, gone back to September. Now, again, what this means is ultimately the program has now forgotten that it has sent an FPS for October, so it thinks you need to send one again. Okay, so just bear that in mind because if you have actually sent one, you're sending another one, doesn't overwrite it, it just adds on top of it. So what you'll end up doing is duplicating information. So let's just send that. You won't get the red warning, don't worry about that one. I'll quickly go through this. I'm sure you'll all have seen an FPS being sent. There we go, just to get everything back up to date. So that's an example of restoring your data through a backup. Of course, there are other files available, but again, depending on the circumstances, data files is the most common, which is why we've showed you that today. Okay, now on to the next option, which is the rollback option. So rollback is quite a common one, nice and easy one as well. So when would you need to do this? If you need to remove any payment history for selected employees. Now with rollback, one of the other differences is you cannot select files. It's literally just going to be those data files, okay? So you can't select which ones you're doing. But you can remove your payment history for that selected employee. You can also choose which period to roll back to. Now, when it comes to this, you'll see here on the right hand side, you've got a bit of an example there, and I'll show you a demo as well. But one thing to remember is every period that it shows here, so we'll use the top period of September, that is the pre-updated state, so before you have updated records. So if you need to reprocess period 4, for example, you would need to highlight period 4. Don't go back to 3, because then you'll have to reprocess an additional period that you wouldn't necessarily need to do. So it's just more time wasted. So always remember that one. When would you use the rollback? So for when you would use a rollback, it would be either to reprocess an earlier period. So if you need to go back a couple of periods, if you've lost your backup, so if there's no backup available as well, you can use the rollback option. And this is good if it only affects one or some employees. So again, I'll highlight that in the demonstration in a minute. But what this means is if you only have one employee to correct, so like we just did in the previous demo, then you would use the rollback option. And that way you're not having to reprocess every single employee, and it saves you a lot of time in that regard too. So speaking of the demonstration, what we'll do now is let's dive into one, and I'll show you the rollback in action this time. So we've got our payroll back up. This time we need to reprocess employee number 7. Okay, so it's just that one employee. So we forgot a payment, we've over or underpaid them. We need to reprocess this person's pay. Now, if I were to restore a backup, as we had to do earlier, I'll have to reprocess everyone. So this time I'm going to reprocess just a single period, but I only want to reprocess one person. It'll save me a lot of time. So we're going to go to File again. But this time, we're not going to go to File, sorry. We are going to move across to Tasks. Okay, so it's in Tasks. I'm in Restore mode again. So it's Tasks at the top this time. Then we scroll down, go to Rollback, and this brings up the Rollback Employee Wizard. You can also, if I just cancel that quickly, find Rollback in the Links option here. So in the middle bit, we have a Rollback, and that again brings up the Rollback Wizard. Quick note, before you do any corrections, make sure you're taking backups so that if you need to try and redo the correction, or if it doesn't quite go right, you can just get back to the point you started at as well. So imagine that as a bit of a safety net, and it should give you a bit more confidence going into these corrections. So rollback, take your backup, then click next. We have our single employee that we have highlighted available here. Click next, and this is where we're going to choose the period. Now, I only want to go back one period for this employee, but if I needed to go back 2, it would just be a case of selecting which one you needed to go back to. So because we need to reprocess tax month 7, we are monthly, or the October pay, as it were, I'm going to highlight that period, okay? So keep an eye again on the last updated date, because remember, it's always a pre-updated state of these periods. So we click next. We click finish. Once it says process complete, click OK. You'll see there that our single employee's last updated date now has the 30th of September. Okay. Now, if you are reprocessing multiple periods, you will of course need to make sure you're processing each period at a time. So if we went back 2 or 3, we would then have to change the process date, reprocess, update records, change the process date again, update records, and so on and so forth until you are back up to date. So we're just going to go ahead and make sure it says October. Yes, it does. Click OK. Just keeping this single employee highlighted. Then we will go in to enter payments. We'll correct the pay. So again, this person missed off, we'll say 30 hours of overtime this time. So we've now added on the overtime that we missed off. We've clicked save and next, close out of there, and now it's time just to update the records. So we'll go ahead and update those records. There we go, and we're back up to date. So in theory, it's as easy as that. Now, obviously, if you're having to do a lot more employees, it can take a little bit longer. We don't have real payroll data here, so it is just made up numbers. You guys, of course, will have actual figures you'll need to enter. Reports wise, when it comes to the rollback, any reports you've printed as a pre-update report, when you print those again, we'll only have that individual employee showing. So what you'll need to do is either attach that to the original report just to show the correction, or run them as a post-update report again, okay? And reminder, any post-update reports are found here in the report section. So that's the rollback option and the restore option. So those are the two fundamental processes that you need to run through in order to correct any errors. So once you've done that, so you've gone and you've either restored or you've rolled back, it's now time to adjust that submission to HMRC. So as I mentioned, if you've already sent that submission, you won't be sending another full submission. You'll be using the full payment submission adjustment, or FPS adjustment option. Again, I'll demonstrate that in a moment. What does this do? So in essence, shows the difference between the original FPS and corrected values. So it's going to inform HMRC that that original one isn't quite right and it needs to be adjusted by a certain amount, either up or down. You would only submit this when the correction is completed and payroll is up to date. So you would only submit this once. So if you're rolling back multiple periods, you must reprocess every individual period first and then send the FPS adjustment when you are up to date. And when you are up to date, you will know that because your last updated date and your last FPS date will then match again. So like I said, keep an eye on those dates on the program. One thing to note as well when it comes to that FPS adjustment is on the surface of it, so in the screenshot, and I'll show you that when we get into the program, it only shows the current period. So if, for example, you've reprocessed 3 periods, but only the first period, so the furthest one back, had an adjustment in it, you then had to reprocess period 2 and 3 at the same amount of pay, so there was no difference, but you still need to reprocess those. When you come to do the FPS adjustment, you may see a liability adjustment of 0 on there because it only shows the most recent period, okay? So if you are correcting multiple periods, just keep that in mind. Don't worry though, the adjustment is there in the background, because if there was nothing to send and there was no adjustment to be made, the program would not let you send this, okay? So even if you see 0, it is in the background, just to keep a note of that one. Okay, let's jump in the program now and let's have a look at an FPS adjustment. So as you know, we've now gone ahead, we've reprocessed employee 7 who had an adjusted pay. That means because we paid them more, our liability has changed slightly. So I need to now go ahead and adjust that to HMRC. So we're going to go ahead and click FPS adjustment here on the left-hand side. Just to let you know, if you have your payroll process map as well, it's here. So it's after your full payment submission. That's if you use that. If you're like me and you prefer to use the task list on the left-hand side, it's down here. So when we click on that, click continue, check your details, hit submit. Now we've highlighted all of our employees. You'll see there it's all got 0, but there's employee 7 with that adjusted amount. You'll see here we have a total liability adjustment as well. If you want to check that, you can of course print this as well. Hit the submit button, click close, and that's it. So that's all there is to it when it comes to adjusting your submission. And remember, you only do this once. So even if you are correcting multiple periods, you only do this once at the end. So once you've finished your full reprocessing. So that's it. So that's all there is to it when it comes to an FPS adjustment. And there's one final thing you need to do to complete your error correction, and that's to adjust your employee's pay. And the good news is not too much to do in the program for this one, but what you can do is you can print off a corrected payslip and the original payslip, so you can compare the two. So we've got a couple of examples there. So you can find the difference in net pay. Once you've found that difference, it's just a case of making that additional payment to an employee for an underpayment, or in the next pay, you can deduct that overpayment if it's an overpayment from the employee's next payment. So it's about manually adjusting what actual money you are giving them. You may also want to compare the original and the corrected P32s to find any differences in liabilities to HMRC. So that's HMRC payments. And then what you'll need to do is either make an additional payment or deduct any overpayments from your next payment to HMRC. Now, put a little star next to that, just because we always advise if there is a difference, speak to HMRC. We unfortunately cannot speak for them as to how they would like that adjusted. We've popped that on as to what is the normal circumstance. But just as an additional caveat, make sure you are checking with HMRC should you need to adjust any payments to them as well. And 9 times out of 10, they'll follow that model usually. But again, we have to advise, speak to them. Of course, to check that, you've got your P32s as well, so you can compare your original to your corrected one. So that's it for error corrections. So we've come to the end of the main content. However, I do want to just run through some further support that you have available to you. So once the webinar has ended, you will get a recording, by the way, as well. So that usually comes about an hour after. But you can, of course, visit the Help Center as well, should you need any step-by-step guides to go through when you need to make any kind of correction. So there you can search our knowledge base. So you can type in correct an error or correct my payroll, and then it'll come up with all the relevant articles with both the options that we showed you available as well. You can also check through some support guides. So you can see there on the screenshot, there's actually correcting mistakes in payroll. So there's a full support guide available to you there as well. We do have webinars running weekly, every Thursday, in terms of the different subjects that we run. So check out the webinars. You can find these in the Help Center as well, in that little webinar button in the top right. There's also videos there, as well as the get in touch options. So it's worth a check in there as well. Now, we do have webinars running a lot this week for the new update that is coming to National Insurance. So be sure to check out those. So we've got one in about an hour's time, at about 3:30, and another one happening tomorrow morning as well. Not only that, you also have Sage University. Now, Sage University is a free tool, so head on over to sageu.com, where you can access e-learning, certifications, bite-sized learning, again, free of charge for you to do in your own time if you would like to expand your Sage payroll knowledge. So be sure to check out Sage University. So I can see a quick question that's come in, so I'll just quickly show you that as well, about how to print the P32 for various months. If I pop into our program, if you need to print a P32 for previous months, simply click on P32 report here in the links, and it will give you an option of which period you need to print them off by. Always do it period by period, so never do it 4 to 7, for example. Always do it 4 to 4 or 3 to 3. Just choose the tax period, click OK, and that will give you the P32 for that particular period. So you can see there, tax month from 4 to 4. So always do them period by period. So that's how you would rerun a P32 for a previous period if you are correcting multiple periods. Okay, yeah, that is it in terms of the webinar itself. So we are going to leave it open for any remaining questions that you may have for the next few minutes. So I'm going to pop myself on mute. If you are leaving us at this stage, it's been an absolute pleasure to see all of you here with us today. I can see a few familiar names as well, so it's lovely to see some regulars to our webinars as well. Just a quick reminder as well, when you do leave the session, you will be prompted to a quick survey, both myself and Duncan really appreciate any feedback that you guys give us. It's invaluable to us in order to improve webinars, try new things and new features. It's all done based on what you guys feedback as well. So it's really important to us, and it does mean a lot. So I do appreciate you taking just a small amount of time, if you can, to fill that in. So I'm going to pop myself on mute now, give Duncan a hand with the questions, and I'll be back once we have answered everybody. So thanks again. Okay, so I can see all the questions have been answered there as well. So big thanks to Duncan for helping out with that one. And thank you all again for attending today's session. It's always nice to see such a busy one as well. So that's it from me. I hope you're all looking after yourselves out there and continuing to stay safe. And hopefully we will see you in the next one. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you soon.